If I can make the world's largest beef Wellington with Gordon Ramsay and live to tell the tale, I think you can make a normal sized beef Wellington. A great beef Wellington starts with great beef. This cut of beef right here is called the Chateaubriand, but what it really is just the nicest cut from the long tenderloin that comes from a cow. Just to make sure you really understand what you're looking at, if I cut this into a couple different portions, I get a few filet mignons. The first step is to dry this off completely. Make sure to dry off every single corner of this beef. The reason we're doing this is because the drier we can get the steak on the outside, the better the crust. Now, just like any steak, we're going to cover it in salt, and this cut of beef here can handle quite a bit of salt without tasting too salty, so keep that in mind, as well as some fresh cracked pepper. And remember, roll it around on all the sides to cover everything, including both of the ends. Once you've seasoned it up fully, go ahead and add a nice layer of oil to a cast iron pan, and once that oil begins to smoke, lay the beef down away from you. Make sure you really press it down on all sides to get a nice hard sear, and remember, the goal is to get a sear all the way around the beef at this point. It's not to cook it all the way through, because the Wellington cooks more in the oven. Once you've gotten a nice sear on the first side, go ahead and rotate it about a third of the way over to the other. I kind of like to look at my Chateaubriand sort of like a triangle. And what I mean by that is that in just 3 turns, you can sear the whole thing. Whereas if you just flip it over once, you're kind of missing those edge pieces. Once we get a nice crust on that second side, I'll go ahead, go down onto that third side. Once you've seared all sides, lift the beef up like this and make sure you get the ends. You don't have to do the ends for too long, but just make sure you get a nice little bit of sear there. Once that is eventually finished, I like to just put it down one last time and roll it around a couple times very gently to make sure I really touched every single corner of that beef. And once you feel like you've gotten that really nice, beautiful sear, go ahead and rest it off to the side. And then right away, paint it all over with mustard. The first time I did this, I didn't really understand this step, but now I realize that in addition to providing flavor, this mustard acts like sort of a glue when you end up rolling all the other Wellington ingredients together. Just like with searing the beef, it's important to cover all sides with this mustard, and it's also important that you do it while the beef is still nice and hot from cooking so that it actually soaks in some of that mustard flavor. Now, we'll place this in the fridge uncovered to let it cool down. We'll move on now to make what's called our duxelle. A duxelle is basically this concentrated mushroom paste that's going to have a really deep and savory flavor that'll keep the beef Wellington juicy without letting it get soggy. And as you can see, I like to use a few different types of mushrooms. First, we've got shiitake mushrooms. These have a deep umami and smoky flavor with a bit of a meaty texture. I'm going to pulse these up in batches since there are so many, with the goal being to get them all nice and finely chopped like this. Once these are chopped, I'll go into a pan over medium heat with some butter as well as some oil, and then in go the shiitake mushrooms while we then get back over here to pulse up the rest. The next mushrooms we'll chop are our cremini mushrooms. These have a mild, earthy, and nutty flavor to them, as well as our dried porcini mushrooms. These have a very intense, woodsy, almost truffle-like flavor to them. And once again, we'll pulse these up. I'll add these other mushrooms in. See how it's already starting to look a little bit like a paste here? Then give this a quick stir so we're not letting anything burn, and then continue on to our last mushrooms, our chanterelles. These mushrooms are buttery, lightly peppery, and even have a hint of fruitiness. So you can see why I want to use a bunch of different types of mushrooms. All those flavors coming together is a pretty amazing thing. Once we finally added in the last of our mushrooms, we'll mix everything together to get an even mushroom mixture, and then cover this up with a lid to let it sweat for 5 minutes while we prep the rest of our ingredients. For the other ingredients, we'll rough chop a few shallots. Doesn't matter how you cut them because they're going to go straight into that food processor, as well as a few cloves of garlic, a handful of chestnuts. If you've never seen or used a chestnut in cooking before, this is what it looks like. And finally, the leaves of a few sprigs of thyme. And once again, we'll pulse all of this together until it matches the size of those mushrooms. If you need to, go ahead and scrape down the sides of your food processor once or twice just to make sure you get everything. After 5 minutes, you can see there's tons of water on the top of my lid here and lots of steam. That's exactly what we're looking for here. Unless you absolutely hate mushrooms, mushrooms are going to smell amazing at this point. Go ahead now and add in that garlic chestnut mixture and then stir everything together, making sure to scrape off any of those extra bits of flavor on the bottom of your pan until the mixture becomes nice and fragrant, and this is very important, very dry, sort of like a paste. This is also a good time to season to taste with a little bit of salt and pepper. It'll take around 5 to 7 minutes to get this fully dry, and it's important that you don't rush this process because a wet duxelle will mean a wet and messy Wellington, and you definitely don't want that. Once it's dark, thick, and looks something like this, it's not going to look beautiful, but it is going to smell amazing, and we're going for that concentrated flavor. Go ahead and move it off the heat and into a bowl. Before placing it in the fridge, I always push it up the edges of the bowl so it cools down faster, and then place this uncovered, don't cover it up or all that steam will get trapped inside and make this wet again, into the fridge until you need it. Next up, we're going to make the batter for our crepes. All we need is 1 whole egg, a splash of milk, some melted butter, a little flour, and a pinch of salt. And we'll just mix this up on low for about 15 seconds or until fully combined. We'll let this sit off to the side for between 15 and 30 minutes, and I'll explain why we're making those crepes in just a minute. Once our batter's rested, we'll go ahead and preheat a nonstick pan over medium-low heat, then add in just enough butter to coat the bottom of the pan, then pour in half the crepe batter and shake the pan around to fully coat the whole bottom. Honestly, I've learned that the first crepe is never going to look good, but here it really doesn't matter. We're making these to be used as a seal around our beef Wellington to catch all the extra juice so that our puff pastry never gets soggy. Once you've layered your crepes between parchment so they don't stick, go ahead and toss these in the fridge along with everything else. It is time to wrap our Wellington. The first step is to cover your cutting board with a few sheets of plastic wrap, then a layer of prosciutto, making sure it's long enough to cover the length of your beef. As you can see, that'll be the perfect fit and give us a little bit of extra space on the edges to wrap around the sides of our beef. And once you've finished layering down the prosciutto, I like to use some gloves for this next part. Go ahead and press down a nice even layer of your duxelles, making sure to spread it out and cover all that prosciutto. I'll say it again, I know it's not the most beautiful looking food, but it is pure umami flavor that's part of the reason a Wellington is seen as such a luxury food. Take your time with this step and do your best to spread it out as evenly as possible here, because when we go to cut that Wellington open later, you're going to want those layers to be perfect. Now, the crepes. I'm going to cut each one of these in half and then layer them evenly down across the duxelle, and once they look evenly spaced, go ahead and trim off any excess overlap without, of course, cutting down through the duxelle or the prosciutto, and then use all those scraps to cover up any of the edges, really just getting as careful and precise as you want here. That looks pretty good. Now, the most important part of all, the beef. This is going to go right down at the very edge of what we just created, and then keeping everything as tight as possible, I'm going to carefully but confidently roll this all the way around. The tighter the roll, the better your Wellington is going to look. Once you get to the point where those outer layers touch each other, carefully trim off the excess, doing your best to not cut through the plastic wrap, and then tightly roll it the rest of the way through, and then holding the edges of your plastic wrap, roll it as tight as you possibly can until it looks like a burrito. If you're cooking along and you've gotten to this step here, great job. All we have to do now is toss this into the fridge for 30 minutes, or preferably overnight. To assemble our Wellington, I'll flour a cutting board, then place down some thawed puff pastry, flour it again on the top, and begin to roll it out. You shouldn't need to roll this out too much. You'll want it about 1/8 of an inch thick. Once you think you're there, brush off any excess flour, then paint a nice big square in the middle with egg yolk, grab your wrapped beef from the fridge, and then place it right in the middle. Then wrap the puff pastry up the side, keeping it as tight as possible. Go up with the other side, push to fuse them together, and then use a knife or scissors to trim off any excess. It doesn't have to look absolutely perfect here because this will be the bottom of our Wellington, but it should still look pretty clean. Now for the edges, we want to use this egg yolk like glue, and the goal here is to use as little puff pastry as possible while still folding everything together and getting a nice clean seal. Repeat this same process on the other side with the goal of just trying to keep that Wellington as neat and clean as possible. And once everything is rolled up, brush the rest of the flour off the outside of your Wellington and then place it seam side down on a parchment lined baking sheet and toss this in the fridge while you make your lattice pattern. For the lattice pattern, make sure that board is still fully floured, then open another thawed out sheet of puff pastry and roll it out to the same thickness as before. Many people find cutting the lattice to be one of the most difficult parts, if not the most difficult part of making a Wellington, but if you start very confidently at the edge and then use a knife or small tool to help you get those pieces out such that you can lay them down and hold them at the base while you continue to roll all the way through, it ends up being much easier. You may need to use a knife at this stage to trace through some of the lines that the lattice was cut because you want to make sure it all opens up. And there always seems to be just a few stubborn spots that don't want to open up all. Like this, you're ready to lay it over the Wellington. Before placing on the lattice, I'm going to trim down the edges just to separate it from the rest of the puff pastry that we don't need. And then we'll brush the whole Wellington again with egg yolk, making sure to cover it from top to bottom. And then on we go with our lattice pattern, making sure to cover it and spread it as evenly as possible. Feel free to get under there to make sure everything is spread out nice and even. And once you're happy with how everything is spread out, go ahead with one final layer of egg yolk. This is the last one. We're almost there, I promise. Just to cover all the lattice pattern you just added. It can be a little difficult to really cover every single edge of that lattice. I find that brushing it in many different directions helps a lot. But really be serious about getting in there and covering every corner of this Wellington because this egg wash is the way to get it golden brown throughout. And as a final step, cover the whole Wellington with some flaky sea salt, and it's finally time to go into the oven. We'll cook this at 400 degrees Fahrenheit with the cooking time depending a lot on your oven. While our Wellington cooks, we'll make our sauce. Into a small pot, we'll add some red wine, some sliced shallots, try to get them all in the pan if you can, a crushed clove of garlic, a few sprigs of thyme, and a few peppercorns. Now bring this to a simmer and let it reduce by half. And while you wait, I also want to remember to tell you that if your Wellington is starting to brown too much in the oven, you can cover it with a bit of aluminum foil. That's a good little trick. Back to our sauce. Once it's reduced by half, we'll add in some beef stock, and then cook this down again until it coats the back of a wooden spoon. The sauce we're making here is glossy, beefy, and slightly sweet. The perfect complement to a beef Wellington. It gives some nice acidity and a little bit of sweetness to balance everything else out. Once it coats the back of my spoon, I'm going to go ahead and strain it. We want to get rid of all the aromatics here. Then back on the heat, I'll return the liquid, and once it's warmed up again, I'll turn off the heat, toss in a little butter, and whisk hard to combine it into one nice fully thickened sauce. As a finishing touch, we'll add in a bit of aged balsamic, just for that last kiss of flavor. And now, it's time to check our Wellington. Oh, well, I just realized my shoelace is untied. This would not be a good time to trip. And here is our beef Wellington. Once it comes out, it's just like a steak. You want to rest it for about 15 to 30 minutes before slicing, and then you can cut in for the moment of truth. Listen to the sound, too. It's always the best sound. I don't even need to look at it. I know. I would love for everybody watching this video to go to the comments down below and write how you think this is cooked, because nobody can ever seem to agree. Is it raw? Is it overcooked? Is it just right? Let me know. Look at how beautifully juicy this is as I cut into it. The last thing to do is plating. If you want to eat it without putting it on a plate, then be my guest. But after we spend all that time making it look nice, I like to make it look nice just one last time. Perfectly cooked beef, beautiful sauce. Let's see how it is. I have no words. Oh no. Well, that was dangerous.